The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My cheek burned, and the dry, sharp crack of it seemed to suck all the air out of the dining room. That's what you get for being selfish. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, hissed. Now, give me the keys. But the sting on my skin was nothing. The real pain was the silence from across the table. Marcus, my son, wouldn't look at me. He stared down at his plate, as if the humiliation of his mother right in front of him was simply invisible. Hot tears welled in my eyes. But something stronger rose to meet them. A cold, hard clarity. That slap didn't just hurt me. It woke me up. The Sting of Betrayal. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old. For 45 years, nearly half a century, this brownstone in Bed-Stuy has been my sanctuary. I used to think that if I could just raise my son to be a good man, I would have no regrets in this life. But then, one day, right at this dining table, I learned some things, no matter how freely you give them, are never returned. Last Sunday's dinner began like any other. The smell of my pot roast, slow cooked with rosemary and garlic, filled the kitchen. It had taken me 4 hours to make the one meal Marcus, my son, has loved since he was a boy. No one, he always said, made it like I did. Marcus and his wife, Tiffany, arrived 20 minutes late. Tiffany walked in with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. It never did. She scanned my dining room, her gaze drifting over the china plates my mother left me. Over the oak sideboard my husband, James, built with his own 2 hands. The eyes of an appraiser, not a daughter-in-law. We sat down. I placed the best cut of meat on Marcus's plate. An old habit I couldn't seem to break. He's 45 years old. But in my mind, he's still that skinny boy who always needed a little more. The air was heavy. I could feel it. The way you can feel a storm coming by the change in pressure. Tiffany listlessly pushed her mashed potatoes around her plate. Marcus just stared at his phone, his thumb scrolling. Then Tiffany set her fork down. The sound, metal on porcelain, was sharp in the quiet. So, Eleanor, she began. She always called me Eleanor when she wanted something. We've been doing a lot of thinking. I waited. I knew what was coming. I'd felt it in the phone calls, the suggestions, the brochures for assisted living communities left accidentally on my coffee table. This house, she continued, waving a vague hand. It's too much for you alone. And those stairs, they're not safe. I've been going up and down them every day for 45 years. I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. I think I know my way around them. Tiffany's smile tightened. We're worried about you. Marcus and I talked. It would be better for everyone if you moved into the garden apartment downstairs. It's cozy, manageable, and we could move in up here. To take care of you. To take care of me. The words felt hollow. I looked to Marcus, searching for any sign from my son. A shake of his head, a frown, anything. But he didn't look up. The blue light from his phone cast a cold glow on his face. He was a stranger at my table. I placed my own fork down, more gently than Tiffany had. My answer is no. I said, this is my home, mine and James's. This is not up for discussion. And then, it happened. Tiffany's hand moved, fast as a snake. I had no time to flinch, no time to think. A flat, hard smack. My cheek burned. A bright, sharp explosion of white heat. My glasses were knocked askew. For a moment, the whole world tilted. The silence that followed, it was louder than the slap. It was a black hole that swallowed all sound. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner, the distant wail of a siren on Atlantic Avenue, my own breathing, all of it, gone. I slowly brought a hand to my cheek. The skin was humming. I looked at Tiffany. Her eyes were wide, not with regret, but with rage, a raw, naked fury. And then she screamed. Not an apology. An order. We're moving in on Friday. Give me the keys. The keys. She screamed for the keys to my house, moments after putting her hand on my face. But the slap was not what broke my heart. No, it was my son's silence. I turned to Marcus. He finally looked up, but his eyes didn't meet mine. No. He looked down, at the floor, as if there was something endlessly fascinating about the old oak floorboards my husband had polished with his own hands. He said nothing. He did not move. He did not defend me. How did we get here? How did the son I raised, the boy who once brought me wilting dandelions as if they were jewels, become a silent witness to my humiliation? The architect of my pain. My cheek still hums with a phantom pain. But the true ache is deeper. It's a cold, heavy stone in my chest where a mother's pride used to live. As I sit here in the quiet of my kitchen, the smell of leftover roast beef still hanging faintly in the air, my mind drifts. It drifts back to him, not the 45-year-old man who watched his mother get struck, but the boy he was before, Marcus. My Marcus was a beautiful child. He had James's thoughtful eyes and my hands, long-fingered and delicate, the hands of a reader. He was a sensitive boy. He would cry if he accidentally stepped on a snail in the garden. He built intricate worlds out of Lego bricks on the living room floor, worlds with rules and histories that only he understood. He was smart, quick to learn, quicker still to feel. I thought that sensitivity was a gift. I never imagined it could curdle into something else entirely. James and I, we never wanted for anything. Not after he sold his construction company, but we chose to live simply. We believed in the dignity of work, in the quiet joy of a well-tended home, in books and music and long walks in Prospect Park. We wanted to raise a son who understood value, not just price. We thought we were giving him a foundation. Looking back now, I wonder if he just felt like we were giving him a cage. The first crack, it was so small I almost missed it. Marcus was 16. He was supposed to be doing his homework at the kitchen table, but I found him in James's study, a place he knew was off limits. He was holding a piece of paper, a financial statement he must have found on the desk. He didn't look guilty. He looked illuminated. "Dad," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Are we rich like?" "Really rich." James came up behind me. He put a gentle hand on my shoulder. He looked at Marcus, and his voice was calm and steady, the way it always was. "We're comfortable. Son, we're blessed. It means we have a responsibility to be wise." Marcus looked from the paper in his hand to the worn armchair in the corner, to the simple wooden shelves James had built. His eyes, those thoughtful eyes, were filled with a confusion that bordered on accusation. "Then why don't we live like it?" he asked, not like a curious boy, but like a shareholder questioning the board. We tried to explain. We talked about humility, about not letting money define you, about the freedom that comes from not needing to show off. I don't think he heard a word. He was already calculating a different kind of freedom in his head. From that day on, something shifted. A quiet dissatisfaction began to settle in him, a restless hunger that our simple, comfortable life could never seem to fill. As he got older, it became a constant, low hum in the background of our lives. His complaints were always wrapped in the language of concern, of practicality. After he got his first real job in marketing, he'd call and the conversation would always find its way back to money. "My money. This brownstone must be worth a fortune now. Mom," he'd say, his voice casual, too casual. "Have you ever thought about downsizing? You could get a nice little condo in Florida. No stairs to worry about. Play bingo all day." He'd laugh, as if it were a joke. But it was never a joke. It was a test, a probe. He'd talk about his student loans, the rent on his tiny apartment in Queens, the cost of a dinner out. Each complaint was a small, carefully placed stone, building a wall of resentment between us. A wall I couldn't see because it was disguised as a bridge of shared troubles. I'd listen, and I'd offer what I could, a home-cooked meal. A few $100s slipped into his coat pocket that I'd say was a little something from your father's memory. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a mother. Did I love him too much? Or not wisely enough? That's the question that haunts me in the quiet hours of the night. Every time I paid a credit card bill he couldn't manage. Every time I overlooked his subtle jabs about my frugal lifestyle. Was I easing his burden? Or was I feeding the very discontent that was consuming him? Was I watering a seed that I should have let wither in dry soil? He was the architect of my pain, you see. But I realize now, asterisk, I was the one who handed him the bricks, one by one. The ghost of winter's past. The first time Marcus brought Tiffany home, it was the week before Christmas, 10 years ago. She stood in my doorway, shivering in a coat that was more fashion than function, clutching a bottle of wine like a shield. My first thought was, she's hungry. Not for food. I had a pot of collard greens simmering on the stove that could warm the coldest soul, but for something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Her eyes scanned my home, not with the warmth of a guest, but with the sharp, quick appraisal of someone sizing up the competition. I didn't like her. It's a hard thing for a mother to admit. You want to love the person who makes your child happy. But her smile was an invention. Something she put on like lipstick. Marcus, however, was beaming. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And so, for his sake, I smiled back. I took the wine and invited her in from the cold. For months, she remained a puzzle to me. All sharp angles and designer labels bought on sale. She talked about wanting security, a home, a foundation. I thought it was just the empty talk of a generation raised on magazines. But then came the night I saw the ghost she carried. It was a Tuesday in February. Marcus was working late, and Tiffany had stopped by after a client meeting, her face pale with exhaustion. I made her a cup of chamomile tea, the way my own mother used to for me. We sat in the kitchen, the only sound, the gentle hum of the old refrigerator, and for the first time, she let the mask slip. She told me about her childhood, not in Brooklyn, but in a big house in Westchester with a lawn so green it hurt your eyes. Her father had been a successful architect. They had everything. And then, one winter, they had nothing. The market crashed. Her father's firm went under. She was 16. She described the men who came to the house with clipboards, putting stickers on their furniture, on her piano, on the grandfather clock that had been in her family for 3 generations. She spoke of the silence in the car as they drove away, leaving the house behind forever. But the thing she remembered most, the memory that was etched into her like a scar, was the sight of her father, a big, proud man, sitting on the curb across the street, just watching the house that was no longer his. And he was crying, silently. She looked at me then, her eyes swimming with a decade-old pain. I will never be that helpless again. Eleanor, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but harder than steel. Never. In that moment, I didn't see a grasping, hungry woman. I saw a 16-year-old girl watching her world crumble. I saw the ghost of that winter past. And my heart, the heart of a mother, went out to her. I understood. Then, her hunger wasn't for things. It was for solid ground, for a foundation so deep no market crash could ever shake it. And I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe. I thought I had misjudged her. Maybe we could find our way to each other. 2 women who understood that a house is more than just bricks and mortar. But I was a fool. I saw her wound. But I failed to see the person who was sharpening it into a weapon. A few weeks after that conversation, Marcus came to me alone. He sat right where Tiffany had sat. In my warm kitchen, he looked tired. His shoulders slumped. He told me about their debts, the rising rent, the pressure. Then he leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "Mom," he said, "you see how much Tiffany has been through. She's terrified. All that stuff with her dad, it really did a number on her." I nodded. "I know. Son, it was a terrible thing. She just needs a safe start," he continued, his eyes pleading. "A place that's ours. A place no one can take away." He paused. And then he delivered the line he had been practicing. "This house, it's everything she's ever dreamed of. Do you see what he did? He took her genuine pain, that sacred, wounded part of her I had been shown in confidence, and he polished it. He shaped it into a key, hoping it would unlock my door. He wasn't trying to heal her ghost. He was using it to haunt me. She wasn't a monster. She was a haunted woman. And my son, my dear son, was handing her the stones to throw. Have you ever looked at a loved one and seen a stranger, a strategist where a son should be? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this. The slow siege asterisk. You know, a direct attack. You can brace for it. You can see it coming. But what Marcus and Tiffany did, it wasn't a battle. It was a siege. A slow, quiet siege laid upon my spirit over the last year. It was waged not with shouting, but with suggestions. Not with weapons, but with words coated in the sweet poison of concern. It began subtly. A brochure left on the coffee table. Glossy pictures of smiling seniors playing shuffleboard in a place called Golden Vistas. Tiffany would claim she picked it up for her own grandmother, but her eyes would watch me as I moved it to the recycling bin. It was a message. You are old. You are a problem to be managed. Then came the gifts. For my birthday, Marcus gave me one of those medical alert necklaces. It came in a neat little box with instructions on what to do in case of a fall. I put it in the back of my sock drawer, next to a sachet of lavender. I am 72, not 92. I can still climb the stairs to my own bedroom, but the gift wasn't for me. It was for them. It was a piece of evidence for a case they were building against my independence. The phone calls became strategic. Tiffany would call in the middle of the day, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Just checking in. Eleanor, are you eating properly? Did you remember to take your blood pressure medication? As if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with her own health. One call. I remember it vividly. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. Tiffany was crying, hysterical. I'm pregnant. Eleanor. She sobbed into the phone. We're going to have a baby. But how can we bring a child into that tiny apartment? A baby needs a stable home. A real home. A silence hung on the line, heavy with expectation. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she was lying. It wasn't the sound of a woman overjoyed with new life. It was the sound of a gambler playing her last desperate card. I said I was happy for her, and then I hung up and sat by the window for a long time, watching the autumn leaves fall. But the worst part was the change in Marcus. My son, he started talking to me not as a son, but as a project manager. During these serious conversations, he would stop calling me Mom. I would become Eleanor. Eleanor, he said one Saturday, standing in my hallway and pointing at a hairline crack in the plaster near the ceiling. We need to talk about the structural integrity of this place. 2 days later, a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard showed up. Marcus introduced him as a friend, a contractor who was just going to take a look. But I saw the man measuring the square footage of the rooms. I heard him murmuring about property values and zoning laws. He wasn't looking at cracks. He was appraising my life. I knew what they were doing. I wasn't naive. I saw every move, heard every insinuation, and I stayed quiet. Why, I ask myself that now. I think a part of me was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping that if I just stayed still, if I didn't react, the ugliness would recede. That my son, the boy who loved snails and Lego bricks, would eventually surface and put a stop to it. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a prayer, a foolish, desperate prayer that was never going to be answered. The constant pressure was exhausting. It was like living with a low-grade fever, a persistent ache behind the eyes. It wore me down. It made me question my own mind. Am I being too sensitive? Am I being selfish? Am I the one who is unreasonable? That is the true cruelty of a siege. It makes you begin to doubt the very walls you are defending. That's why I decided to have that Sunday dinner. I couldn't live with the quiet hum of their campaign any longer. I decided it was time to end the siege myself. I would make my roast beef, sit them down at the table James and I had shared for 40 years, and I would speak my truth. I would tell them, with love but with firmness, that my life was my own, my home was my own, and the discussion was over. I had planned it all out. I was going to be the one to act. I never imagined they would strike first, and I never, in my darkest nightmares, imagined it would be with such brutality. The unsheathing, the scream for the keys still echoed in the corners of the room. A sharp, ugly tear in the fabric of a Sunday evening. My cheek throbbed. A dull, pulsing heat that radiated into my jaw. But underneath that physical sting, something else was happening. The part of me that had been churning with the hot turmoil of shock and a mother's wounded love suddenly went still. It was a profound and terrifying quiet, the kind of silence you find at the center of a hurricane, just before the world is torn apart. That slap had not broken me. No, it had done something far more permanent. It had vaporized the last lingering fog of my illusions. For years, I had navigated my life by a map of excuses. I drew lines around his weakness. Calling it sensitivity, I colored in her hunger. Calling it ambition, I had told myself that it was my job, my sacred duty as a mother, to love unconditionally, to understand endlessly, to give without question. I had mistaken my infinite patience for a virtue, for a kind of quiet strength. But now, in the glare of this raw, new silence, I saw it for what it was: a poison, a slow, sweet poison I had been feeding not only to them, but to myself, allowing the sickness in my family to fester and grow in the dark. The pain in my cheek was a compass needle, finally jolted free from its housing. It trembled for a moment, then pointed north. And north was my husband's study. I pushed my chair back from the table. The scrape of the wooden legs against the floor was a violent, ugly sound in the stillness. Tiffany watched me, her chest still heaving, her eyes narrowed with an anger that had not yet given way to fear. Marcus finally looked at me fully, and what I saw in his eyes was not remorse, not a shred of it. I saw a flicker of alarm, a dawning awareness that a familiar landscape had just shifted beneath his feet, and he no longer knew the way. I walked out of the dining room. My steps were not hurried, they were deliberate. Each footfall felt solid, planted in the wide oak floorboards that James and I had picked out together at a lumberyard in Queens. So many lifetimes ago, I walked through the archway into the living room. Past the gallery of photographs on the wall, there was Marcus at his 5th birthday party. Chocolate on his chin, Marcus at his high school graduation, his gown too big for his shoulders. A smiling boy who, I now realized, no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. I reached the door to the study and placed my hand on the cool brass knob. This was the one room in the house that was more his than mine. I pushed the door open. The air in here was different. It always was. It smelled of old books with leather bindings, of lemon polish, and of him. It smelled of quiet strength, of problems solved on a yellow legal pad, of a life built with intention and care. My eyes went straight to the silver-framed photograph on his big oak desk. It was of the two of us, taken on the day we sent the final mortgage check for this very house. We were young, 30-something, holding up a bottle of cheap champagne, grinning like absolute fools who had just pulled off the impossible. But it was his eyes I looked at now, steady, clear. They looked right back at me, full of a love that was as solid and dependable as the foundations of this brownstone. And in the deep, sheltering stillness of his room, I heard his voice, not a memory in my ears, but a feeling that resonated in my bones, a low, calm rumble, the way he used to speak when I was worried about something small, something foolish. Asterisk, you are the custodian of this family. Eleanor, not its doormat. Custodian, the keeper, the guardian, the one entrusted with its care, not the sacrifice laid upon its altar. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing, which had been shallow and tight in my chest, deepened. The mother who had walked into this room, the woman, defined by her limitless capacity to absorb pain, was gone. The woman who remained was Eleanor Vance, James Vance's widow, the steward of his hard-won legacy. I turned to the built-in bookshelf, the one he had made with dark cherry wood that glowed under the lamplight. I ran my hand along the spines of his favorite history books, the biographies of great and complicated men. My fingers found the right one, a thick, heavy volume on the Civil War. I pulled it from the shelf. Behind it, almost invisible against the dark wood, was the small, black dial of a wall safe. My hand was steady as I turned the numbers, a combination of dates I had hoped I would never need to use again. The safe clicked open with a soft, satisfying sound. Inside, behind our marriage certificate and the original deed to the house, was a slim, black leather folder. It was not our will. It was not a list of stocks and bonds. It was something else entirely. Something I had started compiling 5 years ago, with a heart so heavy it felt like a stone in my chest. When I first realized my son's bad luck was becoming a deliberate pattern of behavior, I took the folder. It felt heavy in my hands, far heavier than its slender profile suggested. It was weighted down with receipts, with canceled checks, with highlighted bank statements, with quiet, digital transactions made late at night in the name of a mother's boundless, foolish love. A love that had been mistaken for weakness. A love that was about to be redefined. I did not call our lawyer. His number was on a card right by the phone, but I didn't even look at it. I did not call anyone. This was not a legal matter anymore. Not really. This was a matter of the soul, my soul, and I would handle it myself. I walked back to the dining room. They were still there, frozen in their ugly little tableau of greed and betrayal. They looked up as I entered, a new uncertainty in their eyes. They were expecting tears, perhaps, or pleading, or maybe a bitter surrender. They did not expect the woman who walked back in. I went to the head of the table, my rightful place, the place where James had always sat. I did not sit down. I stood there, tall as my 72 years would allow, and I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he had chosen, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I placed the black leather folder on the polished oak table, right between the cooling pot roast and the half-eaten bread. It landed with a soft, definitive thud, a sound that said, "The pleading is over. The accounting has begun." The ledger of a mother's love. The folder made a soft, definitive sound as I placed it on the dining room table. Thump. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the ringing silence of that room, a silence still vibrating from Tiffany's shout, it felt like a gavel coming down after a final, damning piece of evidence. Tiffany stared at it, her brows furrowed in confusion. It was just an old folder, the kind lawyers used to use, made of worn brown leather, softened by age. But Marcus recognized it. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, a tightening around his mouth. He had seen that folder in his father's study 100 times. He knew what it was. It was the ledger, James's ledger, and now, mine. I sat back down in my chair, the chair at the head of the table, my chair. I didn't open the folder right away. First, I smoothed the linen napkin on my lap, a simple, pointless gesture that somehow grounded me. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a balm to my throat, which felt raw. My hands were perfectly steady. The trembling woman who had walked out of the room just minutes before, her cheek stinging and her heart in pieces, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone I hadn't met in a very long time. It was Eleanor Vance, James's wife. "You speak of finances," I began, my voice even and calm. It didn't sound like my own. It sounded like the voice I used when I was head librarian, addressing the board of trustees. Measured, factual, devoid of emotion. "You speak of my inability to manage, of your burdens. I think, for the sake of clarity, it's time we reviewed the accounts." Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound of disbelief. "Accounts? What accounts are you talking about?" I ignored her. My focus was on Marcus. I opened the folder. Inside were not just pages of handwritten notes and stapled receipts. There were bank statements, carbon copies of checks, letters of guarantee, a history of the last 5 years, a secret history of their lives, written in the cold, hard language of numbers. I put on my reading glasses. It was a deliberate act. I didn't just put them on. I unfolded the arms slowly, slid them up the bridge of my nose, and looked down. The world outside the frame of my glasses blurred, and all that was sharp and clear was the ink on the page. It was a shield. It was a weapon. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we?" I said, my voice a quiet monotone. "The foundation of your life together. August 2019. I have here a copy of a cashier's check made out to Kings County Realty. $5,600. The exact amount for a security deposit and first month's rent for the apartment on Ditmars Boulevard. You told me the landlord, Mr. Petrov, was an old family friend who gave you a deal. Marcus, you were half right. He is an old friend of your father's. I paid him directly, so you wouldn't have to worry about the credit check." Marcus shifted in his chair, the wood creaking in protest. "Mom, this is completely unnecessary." "I disagree," I said, not looking up. My finger traced the next line. "I believe it is entirely necessary. Let's move on to transportation. It's difficult to get by in this city without a car. I know. I paused. March 2021. A wire transfer confirmation from my personal savings account to BMW Financial Services. The amount is $4,200. You came to me. Market. So excited. You said your company had given you a stellar performance bonus, and you were finally going to get a respectable car. The bonus. Marcus, the bonus came from me, Tiffany's fork, which she had been nervously tapping against her plate, clattered onto the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up. Her face was a mask of confusion, her eyes darting between me and Marcus. I turned the page slowly. The rustle of the paper loud in the tense air. And then there are the monthly expenses. An interesting category. One might call it lifestyle maintenance. There are regular payments here. $150 for a wine of the month club. So you could entertain your clients? You said. $200 for a subscription box of designer ties. To look the part of a successful man. And this one, I let the silence hang for a moment. A recurring charge of $350 to something called Equinox. I believe that's a rather exclusive gym. Isn't it? For someone so burdened by finances? You both seem to have very healthy hobbies. This is an invasion of our privacy, Marcus finally burst out. His voice thin and reedy. He was half standing now. You had no right to track our spending. That's manipulative. No right. I finally looked up from the page, peering at him over the top of my glasses. My gaze was steady. When you use the American Express Platinum card that I am the primary account holder on, a card I gave you for emergencies only, I have every right. I receive a statement every month. Marcus, I am the bank, and the bank always reviews its statements. The color drained from his face. The story he had told Tiffany, the one he had probably told himself, was that it was a corporate card from a previous job that had never been canceled. A lucky oversight. But there are no lucky oversights in banking. There is only a mother, sitting at her kitchen table late at night, quietly covering her son's indulgences, praying it's the last time. I saved the most personal item for last. I flipped to a tab marked with a small, discreet sticker of a rose, and that brings us to your union, the foundation of this new family, a beautiful ceremony. Tiffany, your dress was lovely. I paused, letting the compliment, now tainted, settle in the air. Then I found the entry I was looking for. Ah, here we are. A payment to Kleinfeld Bridal, and another, a rather substantial one, to a jeweler in the diamond district named Avi. I looked directly at Tiffany. I looked at the diamond sparkling on her left hand, the one she had raised to strike me. It was catching the light from the chandelier, casting tiny rainbows on the tablecloth. That ring is beautiful. Tiffany, I said, my voice soft now, almost a whisper. It suits you perfectly. I'm so glad I chose the right size. That's what broke her, not the shouting, not the slap, not the financial revelations, but this quiet, intimate detail, the knowledge that her most prized possession, the very symbol of her security and her husband's devotion, was a calculated purchase made by the woman she had just assaulted. A single, perfect tear escaped her eye and traced a slow, deliberate path through her foundation. I closed the folder. The finality of the sound echoed in the room. It was done. This, I said, tapping the leather cover with one finger. This is not a record of gifts. Gifts are given freely, from the heart, with no expectation. This is a ledger of investments. Investments in a son I hoped would find his own strength. In a marriage I hoped would bring him a true partner. I took off my glasses and folded them. Placing them precisely beside the ledger, I looked at them both. The son who had watched me be humiliated, and the woman who was his weapon, and tonight, I said, my voice clear and steady as a bell, I have reviewed the returns on these investments, and I have found them to be insufficient. I am divesting. The unmasking asterisk. The room was thick with the residue of my words. Each number I had read, each date I had spoken, was still hanging in the air, glittering like dust motes in the lamplight. Tiffany was staring at her hands, at the diamond ring I had just stripped of its meaning. Her face, which had been a mask of fury just minutes before, had crumbled. It was the face of a child who had been told there was no Santa Claus, no Easter Bunny, no safe harbor anywhere in the world. All the fight had gone out of her. She looked small, defeated. I expected Marcus to rush to her side, to comfort her, to defend her. I expected him to turn to me, perhaps with tears in his eyes, and beg for forgiveness, for understanding. That is what the boy I raised would have done. But the boy I raised was no longer in the room. Marcus didn't move. He just watched Tiffany's shoulders begin to shake with silent sobs. He watched her with a strange, detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a chemical reaction he had predicted all along. My words, the facts from the ledger, didn't seem to have touched him at all. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't remorseful. He was waiting, and then he laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a dry, brittle sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was the driest sound I had ever heard. It scraped the air in that quiet room raw. Tiffany's head snapped up. I stared at him, my heart suddenly beating a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "Oh, Tiff," he said, shaking his head with a pity that was more insulting than any anger. "Don't cry. It was always going to end this way." "What are you talking about?" "Marcus," she whispered. Her voice ragged. "Your mother, she's taking everything." "No," he said. And now he turned his eyes to me. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at me, and there was no weakness in his gaze. There was no fear. There was only a cold, hard clarity that chilled me to the bone. "No, she's finally giving times us what we want. Leverage." I didn't understand. My mind, which had been so sharp just moments ago, felt dull and slow. Leverage. He saw the confusion on my face, and his smile widened. It was a terrible smile. It did not belong on his face. "You really think she came up with this on her own?" he asked me, gesturing toward his weeping wife. This whole drama, the tears, the shouting, he let out another one of those dry laughs. "Mom, please. You're too smart for that." And he glanced at Tiffany with dismissive contempt. "She's too scared." He stood up then and began to pace behind his chair. His movements suddenly filled with a nervous energy I had never seen before. He was performing now. The show was his. "I knew you'd never just give it to us," he said, speaking to me, but also to the room, to the ghosts of all our past conversation. "You're too proud, too attached to all this." He waved a hand, dismissing the 45 years of my life contained within these walls. "I knew I couldn't convince you. Logic doesn't work. Pleading doesn't work. I've been trying for years. So," he continued, stopping to lean his hands on the back of his chair, "I realized I didn't need to convince you. I just needed to create a situation where you had no other choice. A crisis. Something big enough, ugly enough, that you would have to react." His eyes flickered back to Tiffany, who was staring at him now with a dawning horror. "I needed a villain, Mom. And Tiff, with all her baggage, she plays the part so well." He said it with a shrug, as if discussing a character in a movie. All I had to do was wind her up, remind her of the bills, remind her of her father crying on the curb, remind her that this house was the only thing that could ever make her feel safe. I just wound her up and pointed her at you. The air left my lungs. The room began to feel very small, the walls closing in. "That slap," he said, and he actually clicked his tongue, as if appreciating a fine piece of strategy. "Perfect. I couldn't have planned it better myself. It was ugly, public, undeniable." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, triumphant light. "It was exactly what I needed to force your hand, to make you do this." He pointed at the black folder on the table. "To make you lay all your cards out on the table so we could finally have a real negotiation." He finally looked at his wife again. "Thanks. Tiff, you did great." The silence that followed that statement was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. Tiffany made a small, wounded noise in the back of her throat. The look on her face, it was the look of someone who had just realized the person she trusted most in the world had led her to the edge of a cliff and pushed her off, all while whispering words of love. The anger she had felt toward me was nothing compared to the vast, empty chasm of betrayal that now opened up in her eyes. She was not just a tool, she had been a fool, and me. I looked at the man standing before me. This stranger wearing my son's face, the boy I had protected, the man I had enabled, the child whose pains I had tried to soothe, and I finally understood. The sickness wasn't Tiffany's greed, the sickness was my son's resentment, a resentment so deep and so patient. It had been willing to burn down everything, and everyone, just to get what it felt it was owed. The silence in that room was the sound of a family breaking apart forever. If you are still listening, please, leave a single word in the comments that describes your feeling right now. I need to know that there are friends walking this journey with me. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of this story. The Severance, ****. After Marcus spoke those words, the air in the room didn't just go silent. It died. It became a thick, heavy vacuum, pressing in on my eardrums. The ambitious architect of my pain, the stranger wearing my son's face, had finally shown himself. There was nothing left to argue. There was nothing left to feel, except a vast, hollow emptiness where a lifetime of love used to be. The anger was gone. The shock was gone. All that remained was the quiet, ugly truth. I looked at Tiffany. She was still sitting there, frozen, her hands limp in her lap. The single tear on her cheek had dried into a faint, shiny track. She was staring at Marcus, but her expression was one I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. It was recognition. The awful, soul-crushing recognition of seeing the monster you've been sleeping next to for the very first time. In that moment, she was no longer my adversary. She was just another casualty of his quiet war. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked over to the mahogany sideboard, the one James had bought at an auction on their first anniversary. From the top drawer, I took out a checkbook. My personal checkbook, not the joint account, not the family trust. Mine. I also took out a pen, a simple black ballpoint. I walked back to the table and sat down. I opened the checkbook. The silence was broken only by the scratch of the pen on the paper as I wrote. I wrote the date. I wrote out a name, and then I wrote out a number, $10,000. It felt like a completely arbitrary number. What is the price for a son? What is the severance package for a shattered heart? There is no correct number. So I just wrote one that felt final. I tore the check from the book. The sound of the perforation giving way was loud. Clean. A separation. I pushed the check across the polished wood of the table. It slid to a stop right in front of Marcus. This is the last time, I said. My voice was tired, but it was clear. There was no tremor in it. This money is enough for a security deposit on a small apartment. It's enough for the first and last month's rent. It's enough for you to start over, somewhere else. I folded my hands on the table in front of me. The eviction notice for your current apartment will be filed by my lawyer tomorrow morning. The credit cards will be canceled at 9 a.m. The cosign on your car lease will be revoked. Those are the facts. This check, I gestured to the small blue rectangle of paper, is the only thing that is left. It is not a gift. It is a severance. A clean break? Marcus stared at the check as if it were a coiled snake. His mind, the one that was always calculating, was probably worrying, trying to figure out the angle, the trick, but there was no trick. There was only the end. After today, I continued, my name will no longer be a part of your life. You will not call me. You will not visit. You will not receive any more mail at this address. You are 45 years old. Marcus, you are. From this moment on, entirely on your own. He reached for the check. His hand shot out, quick and greedy, and snatched it from the table. He folded it swiftly, without even looking at the amount, and shoved it into his pocket. A transaction completed, but Tiffany didn't move. She didn't look at the check. She didn't look at Marcus. She slowly, very slowly, pushed her chair back. She stood up. Her dress, the one she had worn to impress, now looked wrinkled and out of place. She pulled her purse onto her shoulder. She looked at me, just for a second, and in her eyes, I saw the ghost of the woman she might have been. A woman haunted by the past. Yes, but a woman who, in this final, terrible moment, was making a choice. She turned and walked out of the dining room. She didn't run. She didn't cry out. She just walked. We heard the heavy front door open, and then we heard it close with a quiet, definitive click. She had left him. She had walked away from the car, the apartment, the ring, and the man who had used her. She had walked away with nothing, and perhaps, in doing so, she had saved herself. Now it was just the two of us, mother and son, or rather, a woman and the man who had once been her son. The silence stretched. The remains of the roast beef sat on the platter between us, cold and congealed. A feast that had become a funeral. Marcus finally looked at me. His face was a mess of confusion and rage. You can't just, he stammered. His bravado gone, replaced by the panic of a man whose safety net had just been set on fire. I held up one hand. A simple gesture. A stop sign for a lifetime of disappointment. The boy I raised is gone. Marcus, I said, and my voice was soft again, but it was a softness filled with sorrow, not weakness. The boy who loved snails. The boy who cried when his father was proud of him. He wouldn't have sat there. He wouldn't have been silent. I looked at his face, searching for a trace of that boy. I found none. I don't know who you are, I said. It was the truest thing I had ever spoken. Please, leave my house. The quiet after the storm. After the door closed behind Marcus that night, a new kind of silence settled over the house. It was different from the tense, waiting silence before the storm, and different from the shocked, broken silence after. This was a quiet that was vast and empty. For the first few days, every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap with a foolish, motherly hope, but it was never him. The grief was a strange, heavy thing. It was not like the sharp, clean grief I felt when James passed. That was a sorrow born of love and loss. This was a tangled, messy grief, full of shame and anger and a deep, hollow ache where a son used to be. Some days, I would just sit in James's study, surrounded by his books, and let the quiet hold me. I didn't cry much. It felt as if the tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me. The first real change came about a month later. I woke up one morning and walked past Marcus's old bedroom. For 45 years, it had been Marcus's room. Even after he moved out, it held his old baseball trophies, his high school yearbooks, the scent of him. That morning, I opened the door and saw only a room, a space filled with the ghosts of a boy I no longer knew. So, I began to pack. I bought boxes from the hardware store, carefully. I wrapped each trophy in newspaper. I stacked the yearbooks. I folded the old jerseys. I was not angry as I did it. I was just methodical. It was not an act of erasure. It was an act of acceptance. I packed up the boy, so the woman could have some room to breathe. I stored the boxes neatly in the attic. And, for the first time in my life, the room became just a room. A guest room. A quiet, empty space. I started making phone calls. Not to family, but to old friends. Women I had worked with at the library. Neighbors I had only waved to over the fence. I called my friend Gloria, who I hadn't seen for a proper lunch in years. We met at a little cafe downtown. I didn't tell her the whole ugly story. I just told her I was going through a change. She didn't press. She just held my hand across the table, her grip warm and firm, and told me about her new rose bushes. We talked for 2 hours about roses, and books, and the rising price of everything. It was the most normal I had felt in a long, long time. Little by little, I started to reclaim the spaces in my own life. I took a gardening class at the botanical gardens. I learned the names of perennials and annuals, and my hands, which had once cooked meals for a family that was no longer a family, found a new purpose in the soil. I found that I liked the feel of the earth under my fingernails. It felt real, solid. Then, one rainy afternoon in April, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Eleanor. The voice was hesitant, thin. It was Tiffany. I was silent for a moment. Yes. Tiffany. She started, then stopped. I could hear her take a shaky breath. I'm not calling for money. I don't want anything. I wanted you to know I enrolled in a class at the community college to be a paralegal. I didn't know what to say. That's good. Tiffany. I finally managed, and her voice cracked a little. I'm sorry. For everything, for my part in it. There was another pause. Goodbye. Eleanor. And she hung up. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. It was a single green shoot pushing its way through cracked concrete, a sign that perhaps healing was possible, even if it wasn't for me to witness. That phone call sparked an idea. The upstairs apartment, the one that had been the object of so much ugly desire, was still empty. It was a beautiful space, full of light. It had been sitting there, a silent monument to a battle that had been fought and lost. I decided it was time to give it a new purpose. I hired a few local contractors. We took down some of the non-essential walls. We built bookshelves, from floor to ceiling, just like in James's study. We put in comfortable chairs and good reading lamps. My friends and neighbors donated books, old paperbacks, beloved hardcovers. The upstairs of my house was no longer a prize to be won. It became the Bed-Stuy book nook, a small, free lending library for the neighborhood, a place for stories, and that's when I started to write. Not a book for anyone else to see, just for me. I bought a simple black notebook and a good pen, and I began to write down my own story, starting from the beginning. Trying to understand how a love so big could curdle into something so small, trying to find the exact moment the threads began to unravel. It was hard work, harder than gardening, harder than anything, but with each word I wrote, I felt a little piece of myself coming back into focus. I was finding my own story again. Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as Eleanor, just Eleanor, and it was a beginning. The inheritance. It's been a year now since that Sunday dinner, a full turning of the seasons. I watched the autumn leaves fall, just as I did after Tiffany's phone call. But this time they looked different, not like an ending, but like a necessary shedding. Winter came and blanketed the street in a quiet layer of white, and for the first time in years, the silence in this house felt like peace, not emptiness. And now, spring is here again from my kitchen window. I can see the first green buds on the old oak tree in the backyard. Life goes on. It has to. Do I miss my son? That's the question people are afraid to ask. But I can see it in their eyes. The answer is complicated. I miss a ghost. I miss the little boy with grass-stained knees who believed his mother's kisses could heal any wound. I miss the teenager I argued with about curfews. I even miss the young man who was struggling to find his way. But the man who sat at my table that night, the man with cold calculation in his eyes, I cannot miss him because I never truly knew him. To grieve, you must first have lost something you truly had. And I realize now, what I had was an idea of a son, an idea I loved so fiercely that I refused to see the man he was actually becoming, my husband. James, he was a builder. He built houses with strong foundations, with walls that were true and roofs that would not leak. When he passed, I thought the inheritance he left me was in the bank, a collection of numbers on a statement. I was wrong. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the wisdom he lived by. He used to say, "Eleanor, you can't build a straight wall on a crooked foundation." For years, I had been trying to build a family on a foundation of enabling, of quiet concessions, of love that asked for nothing in return. It was a crooked foundation, and it was always going to crumble. The quiet of this past year has taught me many things. It has forced me to sit with myself, with Eleanor, a woman I had almost forgotten, and in this quiet, I have come to understand a few truths. Truths that I hold on to now like smooth, are solid stones in my pocket. For any parent out there who might be listening, who might see a shadow of their own story in mine, I want to say this: the greatest inheritance we can leave our children is not what we give them, but what we teach them to earn for themselves. We fill their plates. We pay their bills. We soothe their fears. And we call it love. And it is. But there is a point where that love, if not tempered with wisdom, ceases to be a support and becomes a crutch. It stops building them up and starts holding them back. Love is not a blank check, and sometimes the bravest, most loving act a parent can perform is to say no, to let them fall, so they might learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. And for the sons and daughters, please, listen. Your parents are the keepers of your story. They are the first chapter, the ones who wrote your name on the first page. They are not the final chapter in your financial plan. They are not a resource to be managed or an obstacle to be overcome. Respect is not a choice. It is not something to be given only when it is convenient. It is the rent you pay for the space you occupy in your family's heart. It is the debt every child owes to their own history. And what have I learned about the world we live in now? We live in a world of beautiful pictures. A world where people post photographs of houses they do not own and smiles they do not feel. We are all so terribly preoccupied with times how things look, times instead of times what things are asterisk. Marcus and Tiffany wanted the picture of success, the nice car, the expensive gym, the big house. They were willing to burn down a real family for a fake portrait. But I have learned that true dignity, true self-worth, is not something you can display. It's not in a deed or a diamond ring. It's the final, unbreakable wall you build inside yourself. It's the quiet knowledge of your own value, and you do not allow anyone, not even your own blood, to tear it down. I still live in this house. The upstairs apartment, the one they wanted, is now a small, free library for the neighborhood children. On Saturdays, I sit on the porch and read stories to them. Their laughter is a sound that heals old wounds. I am not lonely. This house is no longer a fortress to be defended. It is a home to be shared, on my own terms. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old, and for the first time in a very long time, I am truly free. And so, the story of Eleanor Vance and the dinner that changed everything comes to a close. What do you think of Eleanor's final decision? Would you have done anything differently in her shoes? Please, to share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly do read every single one. If this story made you think or made you feel, please don't forget to leave a like. Share it with someone you believe it will touch. And subscribe to Deepu Kader Stories so you never miss the next mystery we unravel together. I'll see you in the next story, and who knows, maybe next time, the story will be about you.